During the last generation, Nintendo gamers missed out on a lot of classic games. It was mainly due to the Wii's lack of power and third parties' lack of support for its successor, the Wii U. But with the Switch, Nintendo has hit the home run with it being a huge success. So with success, many companies are trying to bring their classic titles to Nintendo Hybrid Machine, and the latest title to receive the Switch treatment is 2K's incredibly popular Borderlands series with Borderlands Collection. So with Borderlands finally on a Nintendo console for the first time, let's see how they did, shall we? If you haven't heard of Borderlands and wondering what the games actually are, they're FPSs with light RPG elements that see you exploring a big open world, completing quests and shooting loads of enemies. The series' biggest selling point is the huge amount of guns and loots on offer. Every enemy you kill or loot box you find contains a gun, and you consistently swapping and dropping your loadout for better weapons. It's such a simplistic gameplay loop that's worked incredibly well and served the series so well for years that subsequent games have changed very little. Each game has a similar setup. You pick up one of the many game's Vault Hunters, each character represents a class, and each character/class has their own skill tree and special abilities to set themselves apart from other classes. A good example of this is Sirens can turn themselves invisible, whilst Berserkers can punch enemies to death. When playing in multiplayer, these characters' different abilities really do come into play, and multiple playthroughs for each character class does really make you change the way you play. On to the games now, and we'll start off with the first game in the series, Borderlands 1, and this version is based on the new Game of the Year edition that was released on the PS4 and Xbox One late last year. This edition includes all the previously released DLC as well as new quality of life improvements that this edition brought to the table, like having a proper map, which makes navigation much more easier. If you played any of the newer games in the series, then coming back to the first game may feel a bit of a culture shock for you, as while the game's signature humour is still here, the game's areas feel incredibly bland, uninspired and flat compared to its later games. But that's not to say it's a bad game. Oh no, it's actually quite a lot of fun. The series' iconic shooting and looting is still very much here, and the game is still a blast to play, and an interesting insight to see where the series started off. Next up is the biggie, Borderlands 2, easily the best game in the series and the game that really put the Borderlands franchise on the map for many. This is pretty much a perfect sequel. It's bigger, better and so much more badass. There's a great big variety in areas with a whole lot of different locales to explore, a lot of verticality to the world now, and it expands on the universe Gearbox has created perfectly. Everything has been turned up to 11, with so many more guns, more outrageous and rather hilarious humour, a lengthier campaign, more robust shooting mechanics, and a whole new cast of Vault Hunters to play as. The traditional gameplay hasn't changed much, and to be honest, if it isn't broke, don't fix it, and the game is such a blast to play. The huge lengthy campaign introduces you to one of the best villains in gaming, Handsome Jack, an incredibly sarcastic and big-headed narcissist that has some of the game's best one-liners. Once you complete the game, there's still plenty of awesome content left to play, as Borderlands 2 has some of the best DLC ever created. One of the highlights is the Tiny Tina's DLC pack, which is still as enjoyable as it was 8 years ago. And finally in this package we have Borderlands the Pre-Sequel, the final game that was released on the last generation of consoles, and this one is easily the most ambitious title the series has seen to date. Taking the fight to space, this one sees zero gravity added to the gameplay to make for even more mayhem to the action. The gameplay is pretty much still the same old shooting and looting we're all used to. This time we have a whole new host of Vault Hunters. One of them is the series' favourite Claptrap, who finally makes his first playable appearance. The pre-sequel is also known for not being fully developed by Gearbox, as 2K Australia helped out a lot here, so that explains why there's an awful lot of Aussie accents about. Content-wise, Borderlands the Legendary Collection offers a heck of a lot of bang for your buck. Like the recent Bioshock Collection, the game contains 3 different titles. You have Borderlands 1, 2 and the pre-sequel, and all the DLCs for each game. The only thing is missing is the last year's final DLC pack for Borderlands 2, the Commander Lilith and the Fight for Sanctuary pack, but considering that sets up Borderlands 3, it's understandable. Altogether, you're talking around a good 200 hours plus worth of content, which is incredibly generous. All this content does come at a price, however. As with many ports of big games to the Switch, this collection sees you having to download a hefty amount of data to play. Taking up an eye-watering 40-odd gigabytes, you'll certainly need a micro SD card to play these games, but thankfully you can download each game separately so you haven't got one huge download, which does make things a little easier. If you go for the physical edition, you still have a big download, as only the first game is on the cartridge, and then that still needs a 7 GB patch to still fully play. As for the other two games in the collection, you'll get a download code for them to use on the eShop. It's a huge shame they couldn't done a Bioshock and fit a little bit of each game on the cartridge, as making you download this huge amount of data is very annoying. When it comes to these Switch ports, performance is a main factor for some, as some developers do have troubles getting their games running on the system, but like the recent Bioshock Collection, Borderlands the Collection looks fantastic on the Switch with some great results. The first Borderlands runs at 1080p docked at 30fps, whilst in handhelds it's 720p at 30fps, and the game runs perfectly with no frame rate drops whatsoever. On to its sequel now, and Borderlands 2 is again a 1080p job at 30fps docked, whilst on handheld it's 720p at 30fps. And again, the showing here is very impressive. The game does drop a few frames later on in the game's busier sections, but that is very understandable considering how much of an ambitious title this was over the original. And last but no means least is the Pre-Sequel, the final Borderlands title for the 360 and PS3. This title runs at a dynamic resolution when docked that aims for 1080p but can drop to 940p in the busier areas. On the portable side of things it's 720p, and again like the previous games it's 30fps in both playstyles. Overall, all games look great on Switch, and it's certainly interesting to see how the series has evolved and expanded over the years. Yes, I know a few folks may be a bit disappointed that the games aren't running at 60fps, but they're a huge improvement and run much more better than the 360 and PS3 versions. Conclusion time now, and it's great to see Borderlands finally on a Nintendo console for the first time with the Legendary Collection. What we have here is an incredibly generous package that fits perfectly on Nintendo's hybrid console. With hundreds of hours of content, the game is easily worth the price of admission. Each game runs fantastically, and even though those games are quite a few years old, they're still incredibly fun. It's just a shame that all the games aren't on the cartridge and you'll have to download a lot of data to play these games. But nevertheless, the game is a must-own for Switch players, and with that I'm giving Borderlands the Legendary Collection an 8.5 out of 10 with the title of great. As always, thank you for watching my review. Like, rate and subscribe, and until next time, happy gaming. Bye.